Christmas morning, 1895. The Blue Ridge Mountains hold the snow like a secret. The air tastes of wood smoke and pine. Beyond Asheville, North Carolina, past forests that run for miles, a private road climbs. Iron gates, a curve upward, and then, a residence that refuses the word house. Biltmore. It rises from the hillside like a fragment of the lawyer transplanted to America. Limestone walls, steep slate roofs, towers and turrets catching the winter light. 4 acres under one roof. 35 bedrooms. 65 fireplaces. A banquet hall whose ceiling soars roughly 70 feet. A library holding 10,000 volumes. Beneath the stone and oak, it is a marvel of 19th-century modernity. Electric light throughout, elevators, central heating from massive boilers, refrigeration, fire alarms, and call buttons set into the woodwork of principal rooms. Numbers signal magnitude, but they do not deliver the sensation. Stand in the entrance hall and look up. Stone climbs for 3 stories. A barrel-vaulted ceiling carries carved oak and painted detail. Polished marble underfoot. Stained glass filtering winter daylight. The architecture is staged to overwhelm, to announce that you have stepped into something deliberately extraordinary. But step past the showpiece rooms, the library, the winter garden with its glass roof and fountain, and the other face appears. Behind the beauty lies the infrastructure of a small city. Deep in the basement, boiler rooms the size of small factories burn coal to feed the heating system. The laundries run industrial machines. Storerooms hold linens, china, crystal, and silver in careful order. The kitchens are laid out not for a family, but for an operation. There are servants' quarters and a servants' dining room. Servants' staircases, narrow and unadorned, are hidden from guests. Long service corridors, painted institutional green and lit by bare bulbs, weave a second circulatory system through the building. Staff move along these arteries unseen, so fires are lit before dawn, water runs hot before anyone wakes, and breakfast appears the moment it is wanted. Biltmore employs well over 100 people: maids, footmen, cooks, laundresses, stable hands, gardeners, foresters, drivers, and electrical engineers to tend the wiring and generators. Plumbers manage the intricate indoor pipes, still rare in the rural South. Each post has a purpose. Remove one, and the mechanism falters. The cost of keeping Biltmore alive is heavy. Coal comes in by the ton. Provisions are purchased in bulk. Wages go out every week. Maintenance never stops. A structure of this size always asks for attention. Leaking slates, hairline cracks in plaster, a pipe that gives way in a cold snap. Christmas of 1895 is a triumph. Music rings in the winter garden, garlands and candles dress the public rooms. Guests arrive by train, then ride by carriage along the winding approach. After dusk, the building glows with electric light, a beacon against the mountains. For a handful of days, the dream feels whole. But under the celebration, a quiet pressure gathers. The house is magnificent, yes. It is also a machine that eats resources at a pace difficult to sustain. The beauty is real. The cost is real. Together, they will govern every choice that follows. An unspoken question begins to form. How long can this last? To understand what comes next, you have to understand who made this place and why. George Washington Vanderbilt II was born in 1862 into America's wealthiest family. His grandfather, Cornelius, the Commodore Vanderbilt, built a transportation empire of steamships and railroads. By the time George received his share, the name signified power on a scale few American families had ever approached. But George was different. While his siblings raised palaces in Newport and New York, George disappeared into books. He was shy, reportedly spoke 8 languages, and collected rare volumes with the intensity others reserved for racehorses. By his mid-20s, he decided on something his brothers did not want: a working estate, a place to manage forests scientifically and live quietly amid beauty and order. In 1888, he visited Asheville with his mother. The scenery was dramatic, the air was clean, and the Southern Railway had recently extended service there. George was captivated. He began buying land, not a token plot, but thousands of acres. Eventually, his holdings exceeded 125,000 acres, nearly 200 square miles. George wanted a house that married European tradition to American technology. To bring this to life, he turned to two legends, Richard Morris Hunt, America's leading architect, and Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect behind Central Park. Hunt designed the house in a French chateau idiom, balancing symmetry with towers and turrets. Every piece of Indiana limestone was numbered, every dimension verified. Olmsted, however, confronted a battlefield. Decades of logging had stripped the soil. Hillsides were scarred by erosion. Olmsted refused to simply decorate. He set out to heal the land. His plan called for large-scale reforestation, hundreds of thousands of trees placed deliberately. The approach road, roughly 3 miles long, would wind through recovering forest to build anticipation. Construction began in 1890. It demanded planning that bordered on the military. A private spur of the railway was driven to the site. A brick kiln on the property fired millions of bricks. At the project's peak, more than 1,000 men worked on the hill. Stonemasons from Italy brought old-world techniques. Carpenters from the surrounding mountains shaped the hardwoods. For 5 years, this was a temporary town held together by Vanderbilt money. By 1894, the shell was tight. The copper roof was on, destined to weather into that blue-green bloom. Inside, plasterers closed walls and electricians tested circuits. Even as the last fixtures went in, another part of the vision was beginning. The part designed to outlast the house itself. The forest was broken, and George knew that to save it, he needed more than a gardener. He needed a scientist. George stood in his library in 1895 and looked out on land that unsettled him. Close in, Olmsted's work thrived, but the wider estate told a story of decades of damage. To fix it, George hired Gifford Pinchot, a 26-year-old who had studied scientific forestry in Europe. At the time, forestry as a profession barely existed in America. We had loggers who extracted and moved on. Pinchot wanted to manage for the long term. Pinchot surveyed the 125,000 acres and saw a living laboratory. He introduced selective cutting, harvesting mature trees while leaving younger growth to protect the soil. He laid out fire breaks and launched reforestation. Pinchot eventually became the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, using Biltmore as his proving ground. He was replaced by Carl Schenck, who founded the Biltmore Forest School, the first of its kind in America. Students lived on the estate, learning to mark trees and diagnose tree diseases. This forest changed an entire American industry. While the forest improved, the farms expanded. The dairy became one of the largest in North Carolina, with Jersey cows grazing along the French Broad River. Vegetable gardens and glasshouses fed the kitchens year-round. George even built Biltmore Village at the gates, a model community with a church, school, hospital, and cottages for workers. His labor policy was paternalistic but progressive. He believed well-treated workers were more loyal. For a decade, the balance held. Investment income covered the deficit that the farms and forests couldn't quite bridge. Social life remained restrained. George married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser in 1898, and she shared his preference for quiet. But the math was delicate. In 1913, the rules of the game changed forever. Congress ratified the 16th Amendment, creating the federal income tax. Suddenly, a massive share of the money that paid for Biltmore's coal and salaries went to Washington. Then, in March 1914, the unthinkable happened. George Washington Vanderbilt II died abruptly following an emergency appendectomy at the age of 51. The news reached Biltmore by telegram. George was gone, leaving 43-year-old Edith with a teenage daughter, a massive house, and an estate that was bleeding cash. The dream was now a liability. Edith sat at George's desk in the library and studied the ledgers. The picture was sobering. Annual operating costs were roughly $250,000, about $7 million today. Revenue from the land covered only a third. Without George's full investment income, the estate would be bankrupt within a decade. Edith faced a choice: liquidate and walk away, or find a way to make the dream pay for itself. She chose the latter. In 1915, she opened talks with the federal government. She sold roughly 86,700 acres of the estate, 2/3 of Georgia's land, to create the Pisgah National Forest. The sale provided the capital needed to retire debts and secure the core 8,000 acres. She then began a systematic downsizing of the household. Staff were cut from 100 to 60. Unused wings were closed to save on heat. Every expense was questioned. Through the 1920s, the strategy held. But then came the Great Depression. Stock values collapsed, dividends stopped, and tourism in Asheville vanished. Unemployment in the region rose past 20%. Edith faced a new financial cliff. There was a floor beneath which the house would begin to rot if maintenance wasn't funded. In a move that bordered on scandal for her social class, Edith decided to open Biltmore to the public in March 1930. She believed that if Biltmore drew tourists, it would save not just the house, but the town of Asheville by providing jobs for guides, ticket takers, and local hotels. Admission was set at $1. On opening day, visitors came from all over, some on foot, some by wagon. They paid their $1 and stepped into the hall. The model worked. Biltmore was no longer a home, it was a museum. Then came 1941. Pearl Harbor. Tourism halted as gasoline was rationed. But Biltmore found a new purpose. The National Gallery of Art needed a secure site far from Washington to protect its collection from potential bombings. For 2 years, Biltmore served as a high-security vault. In darkened rooms, Rembrandts and Da Vincis sat in crates, guarded by men in civilian clothes. The government paid rent, and Biltmore proved it was a national resource, a guardian of beauty in the darkness. The post-war years brought a transition from survival to professionalization. Edith's grandsons, George and William Cecil, took over. William Cecil realized that for Biltmore to survive permanently, it had to be run as a sophisticated business. In 1963, it was designated a National Historic Landmark. Over the following decades, the estate evolved. A winery was launched in 1985, adding a new revenue stream. Preservation became a continuous, scientific effort. Specialized stonemasons were recruited to repair the limestone. Historians were hired to conserve the 10,000 volumes in the library. Modern technology was threaded in lightly. Solar panels were hidden on outbuildings, and advanced climate control protected the art. By the 21st century, Biltmore had become one of America's most visited historic sites, drawing over 1 million guests annually. It now employs approximately 2,000 people, far more than Georgia's original staff. The transformation is complete. What began as a private refuge for a shy billionaire survived through the radical adaptation of a determined widow and the professionalization of his descendants. Who paid for Biltmore? The Commodore's railroads paid for the stone. The 1,000 laborers paid with their sweat. Edith paid with the sacrifice of her privacy. And today, the visitors pay for the maintenance of a dream that refuses to die. How much does the dream cost? More than money. It costs vision, sacrifice, and the humility to let a private home become a public service. The house survived because it learned to serve. If you enjoy these deep investigations into the Gilded Age, please like and subscribe.